Amen. Well, it's so good to be with you this morning. My favourite time, also, hello to everybody online, just to say that too. My favourite time of the year is spring. Any other spring lovers in the house? Yeah, there are a few. Maybe we should do a straw poll as to which is the favourite season, but we probably don't have time for that. So spring is my favourite season. What I love about it is that the nights are drawing out. You go to work and it's light, and you come back from work and it's light, and there's new life springing up. I was just driving over to Costco in West Hill the other day and saw the lambs, see daffodils everywhere. I just love it. There's just a sense of hope and a new season. And I was thinking about the fact that Chuck and Taryn have called this series that we're talking about today, Spring in the Psalms. And I just felt like before I started that maybe there's a sense of hope that some of you need to hear this morning. Maybe we talked about all sorts of things, didn't we, in the first bit of worship. I just have a sense that there are some of you that feel like, I don't have hope for a better future. And the Lord wants to say this morning to you that there is hope. That spring is coming, that a new season is coming. So be encouraged. We've been in this series in Psalms. I know that you guys haven't really been in it for the last little while. I think it was January, February the last time that you were looking at the Psalms. But we're going to go back into the Psalms this morning. I'm sure it's kind of been mentioned to you that David wrote most of the Psalms as you've been kind of looking at the Psalms so far. And this Psalm that we're going to be looking at this morning is no different. It's one that was probably written by David. And really for us to understand the Psalm that we're in this morning, I feel like we need to understand David's life and where he was and what was happening in his life in the moment or the moments before he wrote this Psalm. Lots of you will know about David, but there may be some of you here today who don't. So I'm just going to give you a really short potted history of his life. So David, ages between 10 and 13, he was anointed to be the future king by Saul. David was probably one of 8 brothers, and not Saul, by Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, his dad, I want to see your sons, because I think the future king is amongst them. And Jesse lined up 7 of his sons, and Samuel was like, nope, that's not the future king. And he said, do you have any others? And he called David, who was just a shepherd boy tending the flocks. He was like, yes, he is the future king. It wasn't until some time later that he actually became king. But then we read about a moment where David, the Israelites, God's people, and the Philistines were at war together. And there was a huge, mighty giant. And they were like, who can fight this giant? The giant's Goliath. Most of you will know that story, even if you've been around church just as a little one. You've probably heard that story. And David, everybody else was like armor and all sorts. And David was like, no. I just need my slingshot and my stone. And he beat Goliath. Then Jonathan and David became great friends. And Jonathan's dad was King Saul. And King Saul had it in for David. And interestingly, he gave him an army. But at the same time as that, he was like, I want rid of him. And we see David kind of running for shelter, but winning battles left, right, and center. And having a great friendship with Jonathan. And then David had a moment where he was tempted by one of his soldiers' wives. He had an affair with her, got pregnant with her, and then decided he was going to send him out to battle and make sure that he died so that he could cover it up. And Nathan confronts him. We all need a Nathan in our lives, don't we? And he repented. Where have I got to in my notes? He became more and more successful, and then he decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a census. I'm so proud of all the army that I've got, all of the soldiers that I've got, and I'm going to make sure that I take a census, and I'm going to be like, look at what I've done. Look at my kingdom. Look at the land. Look at all my soldiers. And he was warned against it. But he still went ahead and ordered the census. And theologians say that it was probably because of David not humbling himself and thinking, oh, look at what I've done, instead of giving the glory to God, that he was given 3 options as a punishment for taking this census. And he chose, interestingly, to go with one that meant that for 3 days, his army were going to suffer a plague. And suddenly his life was in danger, and those around him's lives were in danger. And so he realized that he needed to do something about it. And so he fell flat on his face before the Lord. He bought a piece of land, he made a sacrifice, and he cried out to God. And he said, Lord, I'm so sorry. And in that moment, the plague stopped. David's life was saved. But he did lose 70,000 men. And commentators think that it's just after all of this plague and the moment where he's said to the Lord, I'm so sorry, that this psalm is written. So we're going to read together Psalm 30. It should also come up on the screen, I think. And you can turn to it in your Bible, swipe to it on your phones, and follow along with me. So here we go. Psalm 30. I will extol you, Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Lord my God, I called to you for help and you healed me. You, Lord, brought me up from the realm of the dead. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing the praises of the Lord, you his faithful people. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a lifetime, but his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. When I felt secure, I said, I shall never be shaken. Lord, when you favored me, you made my royal mountain stand firm. But when you hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, Lord, I called. To the Lord, I cried for mercy. What is gained if I am silent? If I go down to the pit, will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my help. You turn my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord, my God, I will praise you forever. Thank you, Lord, for your word. So this morning we're going to have a little look at David's journey through the psalm and what that can teach us today as we are living our lives for Jesus. When I was 17, I had failed nothing. I'm not saying that I was great at everything. I'm not saying that I was better at anybody else than anything. I'm just saying that I had never failed anything until I turned 17. When I turned 17, just the year before that, the government decided that if you're going to take your driving test, you need to do a theory test, not just a couple of questions. It used to be like a couple of questions at the end of your test. It'll say, what does that sign mean? What have you? But they decided they were going to do a theory test. They still have them today, but they're a little bit more fancy now than they were when I was 17. When I was 17, it was literally a multiple choice question and answer. There were 35 questions, and the pass mark was 30. And being the kind of person that I am, I'm the kind of person that likes to tell everybody everything that's happening in my life. So I hadn't just told mum and dad. Like most people, when they've got a driving test come in, they're like, just going to tell mum and dad, not going to tell anybody else, just in case I fail. But I was so confident in myself. I was like, never failed anything. And I love everyone to know everything that's going on in my life. So I'm like, I'm taking my theory test, telling everybody, getting excited about it. And then I failed. No one failed their theory test, literally no one, but I did. I got 28 out of 30, and I was absolutely gutted. But it didn't stop there. When it actually came to driving, I also failed my driving test. Everybody was like, you don't want to get Mr. Graves. That, no word of a lie, that was his name, my instructor, my examiner. They're like, you don't want to get him, because if you get him, no one ever passes. So in the car, got Mr. Graves, of course. And I was like, great. failed the first test, reversed up a curb, just literally outside of the driving test centre. Second test, I was like, it'll be okay this time, won't have Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves gets in the car. I'm like, oh no, Mr. Graves again. This time I pulled out in front of a car, failed my driving test. Third time, Mr. Graves gets in the car again. I was like, what is the chances of that? He gets in the car, like, feeling ridiculously nervous. My legs are shaking. I'm like, I'm never going to pass this test. I did pass it. And then I turned to him and I said, I've had you 3 times. And he said, you still need to look in your mirrors more. Anyway, I feel like it was a little bit of a moment of humbling for me because I think I'd got a little bit cocky. Like a bit like, it's fine, I'll pass, no bother, I've never failed anything. I'm not going to fail now. My mum used to always say to me, Jude, pride comes before a fall. Who's all heard of that? Yeah. David was so proud of his battle successes that he was like, I'm going to take a census. I'm going to count everyone. I'm going to be so proud of the land that I have. I'm going to be like, yes, check me out. I think maybe he needed a wee bit of humbling. I read this this week. Uninterrupted success had bred a spirit of security. Let me just read that again. Uninterrupted success had bred a spirit of security. He'd had so much success, and I think, to be honest with you, I'd had enough success that I had a spirit of security that was to do with my own me-ness. And I've been dwelling on that a lot and thinking, where is my security today? What is it that I put my security in? Is it the fact that actually I do okay at the things that I do? Is it that I've got money and I can pay for my mortgage? Is it in the job that I have? Is it that mum and dad could still bail me out if I needed mum and dad to bail me out? What is it that my security is in? We've just spoken, haven't we, a little bit about the fact we're going to plant a church. And if I'm honest with you, this moment of literally leaving our house, our church, our jobs, everything that we feel secure in has made me suddenly realize where my security is. And I'm not sure that my security is totally in the Lord. Because there are moments I'm like, yeah, I've got this. It's going to be fine. The Lord has got this. He's going to be provide. And moments where I'm like, I can't do this. Anyone else feel like that sometimes? Yeah. David had failed to realize that the success of his army wasn't down to his capable government, but was the undeserved favor of God. The Lord, according to his good pleasure, had made his kingdom, which is here described in verse 7 as a mountain. I just wonder whether this morning, for some of us, I think there's probably 2 camps. Some of us just need to take a moment to recognize, Lord, the success that I have, what I have before me, maybe the job that you've given me, Lord, it comes from you, and I want to say thank you to you again this morning. And it's a moment of just recognizing, Lord, thank you. And maybe for some of us, and I put myself in this category, there are other things that have become things that we've put our security in. Maybe it's our ability, maybe it's the money we have, maybe it's a relationship that we have. And all of those things aren't bad in and of themselves. But when they become more important than the Lord, and our security is in them rather than in him, we need to have a wee moment of humbling ourselves before the Lord. And so my first point is humbled. David was humbled, and we need to be humbled before the Lord. My second point is rescued. David needed rescue. David needed rescued from all sorts of things in his life. There were moments in his life where he needed rescued, or his lambs needed rescued from bears and lions. There was a moment where he needed rescued from huge Goliath. There was a moment where he needed rescued from Saul as he's running and hiding in caves and scared for his life. And then there's this moment just before this psalm where he needed rescued from this plague and the people that were around him. We see him throughout the psalm talking about that rescue. In verse 1 it says, "You lifted me out of the depths and didn't let my enemies gloat over me." Verse 2, "I called for help and you healed me." Verse 3, "You brought me up from the realm of the dead and you spared me from going down to the pit." Verse 5, "Your anger lasts only a moment, but your favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning." Verse 8, "I cried for mercy." Verse 11, "You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and you clothed me with joy." And it's interesting, isn't it? Because some of the rescues that David experienced were rescues that he brought on himself. And some of the rescues that he needed were rescues that had happened to him. And I think that we see that throughout the Bible, don't we? We see people that need rescuing because of something that they've done. And we see people that need rescuing because of what's happened to them. So let's take Jonah, for example. Jonah, he needed a rescue. He was told by the Lord to go to Nineveh and tell them about their sin. And he was like, forget that for a laugh. I'm not going there. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run in the totally opposite direction. And I'm going to make sure that I go to Joppa. Well, he did that, didn't he? And then it didn't end well for him in that moment. He was on the boat. There was suddenly this storm on the boat. He gets thrown over the side because he suddenly realizes, if I don't get off this boat, all of the people on the boat are also going to perish. He's like, chuck me overboard. Then he needs rescued from the sea because he's going to drown. He's in the middle of an ocean, and God rescues him with this huge fish that swallows him up and spits him out on the beach. And then God says, will you go to Nineveh now? He's like, okay. I'll go to Nineveh now. Now, he brought that need for rescue on himself. He decided, actually, the Lord has spoken and I'm going to do absolutely the opposite to what I've been told to do. And the reality is that we do things, don't we, that mean that we need a rescue because of our own choices. And maybe there are some people in here today that you're like, do you know what, I'm in this situation or I'm in a circumstance and it's really tough. But I actually know that I've kind of brought a little bit of that on myself. But the good news for you is that even if you've brought that on yourself, we still have a God of rescue who wants to rescue you this morning. Same if you're watching online. Exactly the same for you. If you've brought something on yourself and you're in a situation that you're in and you're thinking, do you know what? I know that I'm in this situation because of something that I've done. The Lord wants to bring a rescue for you this morning. And then what about dear Joseph? Joseph, we can read about him in Genesis. Most of you know the story about him. He's one of many brothers. He's his father's favorite, and so his dad gives him a multicolored, technicolored dream coat. And he says to his brothers, do you know you're going to end up bowing down to me one day? And funnily enough, they didn't really love that. And so they sold him as to be a slave. He went to Egypt. And he worked his way up the ranks when he was there until there was a moment where poor Joseph, I feel really sorry for him, Potiphar's wife says to him, takes a bit of a fancy to him, is like, I quite like him. And she's like, come and be with me. And he's like, I'm going to run for it. So as he runs for it, his coat is left in her hand. And then she's able to say, look what Joseph did, even though he didn't do it. And he ends up in prison. It does turn out all right in the end. So I'd encourage you to finish reading the story because we do see an incredible rescue by God. But those things happened to him. And you know, as Tori was talking about depression earlier, I just have a sense that there are maybe some people here. Maybe you didn't pop your hand up. Maybe you did, I don't know, but maybe you didn't. And I just have a sense that maybe you're in that situation or things have happened to you that have caused you to feel really down and really low. Maybe it's something totally different that's happened to you that's not because of anything you've done, but the circumstances either you were born into or the circumstances you find yourselves in at the hands of somebody else. And God wants to bring a rescue to you too this morning. What I love is that David talks about what that rescue is like. He says, rejoicing comes in the morning. Favor lasts a lifetime. Wailing turns to dancing. Sackcloth now off, he's clothed with joy. Whichever situation you find yourself in, that rescue is here for you today. That rescue is available for you. Joy, dancing, peace. We talked about peace this morning. That's for you too. And then finally, praise. David praised. And the psalm starts with him praising God. And the psalm finishes with him praising God. And also in the middle, he talks about not just him praising God, but he encourages everybody to be praising God. Why praise? We praise because of who he is and what he's done. How many of us have stories already of God's faithfulness? It's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, when I've been thinking and feeling worried and nervous about whether I'm going to find a job, whether I'm going to find a house, whether I'm going to be able to provide for my family when we move up to Elgin, there's been moments where I've been thinking, I need to remember that God has always been faithful. We've had moments like this before where we felt nervous or we felt anxious or we've thought, Lord, will you provide? And every time he does. And there's a moment, isn't there, when we turn our eyes off ourselves and we put them back on Jesus and we remember what he's done and we thank him for it, where it does something in our hearts and something in our souls and something in our minds. Do you know, testimony is a really powerful way of giving God the glory. It was lovely to hear both the Jesus Boy. Was it Jesus Boy? Was that one? I love that. I love that you've got a wee cross on your head as well, Jesus Boy. You keep speaking about Jesus. And Lizzie's story too. And you know, when we share or when we hear testimony, it does something in us as we remember what God's already done, because we think, oh, we could do that again. But it does something for everybody else in the room, doesn't it? Because we're like, oh, I've also got a lady down my street who struggles to walk. Oh, it went okay for Lizzie. Maybe it will go okay for me too. And I was reminded on a Monday, as site pastors, we gather together and we talk about what happened at the weekend and what it was like in our church. And we share stories about that. And Scott Robertson, the pastor of the North site, he tells us about all of these stories and testimonies. They've been great at making space for that, of people sharing Jesus with their friends and their families. And interestingly, when it started, there were just one or two. And now the stories keep coming, and there's more and more stories, and people are starting not to just tell the stories, but bring their friends into the church. There's something so powerful about testimony. And so I want to encourage you, as you speak to your friends, as you speak to people in your Connect group, as you go to your Talking Jesus Connect groups, why don't you share your stories? Whether it's a story of God's rescue for you, whether it's that moment where you came to know Jesus for the first time, or whether it's just his faithfulness over the years, not just his faithfulness over the years, his faithfulness over the years, or whether it's a story about, hey, I prayed for my neighbor and this happened or this didn't happen, because it encourages us. It encourages our spirit. Not only is David praising God for himself, but he's encouraging others to praise God too. In verse 4, it says, sing praises, you faithful people. And I want to encourage us, Central, let's sing praises, you faithful people. It's interesting, isn't it, that today is Palm Sunday, and Ruth mentioned the waving of the palm branches. There's something so encouraging about worshiping together and about doing that together in this moment. So I want to say, do you know, as the band come up later on, in the not too distant future, you'll be glad to know, I want to say, why don't you praise Jesus with every last little bit that you have? because it's powerful. I know that sometimes for me it's been hard to praise. There have been moments in life where it's not been easy. And as I was preparing for this, I was remembering a time when it was just before I moved to Scotland, so it's about 20 years ago. I was about to marry Archie, and that was a great thing. But I was leaving literally everything behind. Funny, because it almost feels a little bit the same again. I left my family, I left my friends, I left my job, I left my house, and I was moving all the way up to what I thought was the frozen north. It's not quite as frozen as all that, is it? Some people think it actually is. And I remember standing in my church, and we were singing this song, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." And I remember thinking, I don't think I can sing this right at this moment. Life feels dark. I feel really low and anxious and worried and fearful about what life might look like when I move up to Scotland. The words are this: "Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise." And then this was the line: "When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will sing." And I remember the words coming up on the screen, and I remember choosing in that moment to sing and putting my will behind it. And in the moment that I sang that, tears just started running down my face. Because there was something so powerful about proclaiming that for myself and for singing it to the Lord. David also knew what it was like when the darkness was closing in. He said this, didn't he? He said, "When I feel secure, I said, I'll never be shaken." That's true for us, isn't it? When I'm feeling fine, I'm like, I'm fine. Nothing's ever going to shake me. "Lord, when you favored me, you made my royal mountains stand firm. But when you hid your face, I was dismayed." And having also been through a period of depression myself, I remember feeling like, "Lord, where are you?" And choosing to praise in that moment was powerful. And so I just wonder whether there's some people here this morning where you've come, and that's been such a brave thing, and well done for coming. But actually, it's really difficult to praise. And I want to encourage you in the moment where we stand and we sing together, put your will behind it. Say, "Lord, I am bringing you what I have. I don't feel like it, but I'm choosing to praise." I'm going to leave you with this. I was at a friend's house a couple of weeks ago, and we were reminiscing about us being teenagers. It's quite a long time ago now. I know, you don't look it, do I? Anyway, we were reminiscing about being teenagers and the kind of worship music that we used to listen to. Now, this is going to show my age, because probably most of you won't have heard of this band. But who's heard of Delirious? Oh, yeah, there are some of you. Who hasn't heard of Delirious? Oh, that's not like, guys, I teach 3 days a week, and that didn't work. If you've heard of Delirious, put your hands up. Right. Oh, so more of you are only up to now, I see. If you haven't heard of Delirious, put your hands up. Yeah, that's a bit better. That's a bit better. Makes me feel better anyway. Anyway, there was this time where, because I lived in the south of England, and I lived really close to where they were from. They had a church in Littlehampton, and they used to put on these events called Cutting Edge, and there were like, I don't know, about 100 of us in the room or something. And they became more and more famous, as clearly You can see. And there was a time when there was this huge campaign to get one of their songs called History Maker into the charts. And loads of us at the time were like, we want to see if we can get History Maker into the charts. We want to get it into the top 10. So then it's going to have loads of airtime. It's going to be being played on the radio. Loads of people will hear about Jesus. All of us were like buying it. We don't really do that anymore in the same way, do you? Loads of us were buying it. It ended up in the top 4. I think it was number 4 in the UK charts. It was being played in my school, like canteen and stuff like that. And we were like, yes. Anyway, we were remembering the song. And so we were chatting about it. And I put it on and I played it. And as I was playing it, I had a real moment of, wow, God, you are so faithful. Because the words that I sang back when I was probably about 16 are still so true for me today, 30 plus years later. And I just thought, the faithfulness of God, when we sing out and we proclaim things over our lives and about him and about who he is powerful. And I was just going to read you what the words were. I'm going to be a history maker in this land. I'm going to be a speaker of truth to all mankind. I'm going to stand and I'm going to run into your arms again. I still want to be a history maker. I've not made history yet. And I still want to be a speaker of truth to all mankind. And that's why we're going to plant a church. Because we want to be speakers of truth to all mankind, because there are people in Elgin who don't know Jesus. And I just want to encourage you this morning that praise is powerful, more powerful than I think we even realize. And the same God of my teenage years is still the same God of my 40s. And so, band, I wonder if you could kind of come and reappear. Didn't they do a great job this morning? Thank you guys for leading us so faithfully. It's really brilliant. You can give a wee clap in that moment. Listen, I'm used to 2 days with 8, 9, 10-year-olds in school. I tell you what, they make an awful lot of noise when you don't want them to make any noise. You guys, you can make some noise when we want you to make some noise. It's okay. We love that here. Do you know, as we come back into worship, I want to encourage you on a few things. First of all, maybe you need a moment just to recognize, Lord, all that you've given me, all the goodness that I have in my life, I'm humbling myself today and I'm saying, thank you for it. And if that's you, we would love, love, love to pray with you and just to stand with you. Or maybe you have a moment where you're like, do you know what? I know that there are other things that have become my security, the things I've put my security in that aren't in the Lord. And we would really love to pray with you too. That will definitely be me today. Or maybe you need a rescue. There was that song, Pull Me Through. We're asking God, pull me through in the darkest valleys, in the deepest places, in the bits that are hard, where I need a rescue. I need you to pull me through. Maybe it's a rescue of something that you've brought on yourself, and you need to have a wee moment of just counting the cost and kneeling before the Lord and saying to him, Lord, I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's something that's happened to you. And actually you're really struggling with depression, or you're struggling with the circumstance you find yourself in. We would love to stand with you and just say, Lord, would you pull them through? Lord, the God of Joseph, the God of Jonah, would you rescue them? Would you show your rescue? Or maybe it's none of those things at all, and you just would love someone to pray with you and stand with you. We'd also really, really love to pray with you. And if none of those things are something that you would like prayer for, why don't you just, as the band play, why don't you just praise your heart out on this Palm Sunday and be like, Lord, even though maybe I'm struggling, even though things, I don't feel you or see you, I just want to encourage you in this time where maybe you feel like you can't see the Lord's face, to pursue his face, to long after him, to choose to praise.